In 1875, 17-year-old Princess Louise of Belgium married 31-year-old Prince Philip of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a union that quickly turned bitter and abusive. After years she fled, an act which sparked scandal and family outrage. Louise was eventually detained though, and was sent to a mental institution to live out the rest of her years. But this wasn't where her story ends. So, join me as we explore what happened to her. Princess Louise Marie Amélie of Belgium was born on the 18th of February 1858 in the Belgian Royal Palace in Brussels. She was born into a relatively young nation. Belgium had only recently gained its independence after the 1830 revolution, following centuries of rule by the Burgundians, the Spanish, the Austrians, the French and the Dutch. Her father was Prince Leopold, the heir to the throne who would become Leopold II, the King of the Belgians, in 1865. At the time of her birth, Louise's grandfather, the first King of Belgium, Leopold I, was the reigning monarch. Louise's mother was Marie Henriette of Austria, a member of the Austrian Habsburgs, the royal family that had ruled Belgium for most of the 18th century. She had married Leopold in 1853. Louise was the first child of Leopold and Marie Henriette's marriage. As an infant, her father described her as very wise and pale, joking that she had dark eyes and a large nose, worthy of mine in every way. Sadly, this would prove to be the high point of their relationship, as we will soon see. 3 other children followed. A boy named Leopold in 1859, and then 2 more daughters, Stephanie and Clementine in 1864 and 1872. But tragedy had struck the royal household. In 1869, when young Leopold was just 9, he died from complications of pneumonia, the lingering result of a fall into a pond the previous year. His death devastated the Belgian royal family, and the 10-year-old Louise was left grief-stricken. This loss left King Leopold II without a male heir, deepening the cracks in his already troubled marriage with Queen Marie Henriette, and leaving their children to grow up in a tense, fractured household. The couple shared few interests, little affection, and like so many other royal matches of the era, their union had been arranged for duty rather than love. As the eldest daughter of the Belgian king, Louise was expected to marry into a prominent royal or aristocratic family in order to strengthen the small kingdom's diplomatic ties. Belgium was a minor power at the time when the European great powers were locked in a struggle where might often made right. Prussia and its German allies, for instance, went to war with France in 1870 and seized the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine from the French after a short war. Countries like Belgium were well aware that they needed strong alliances in order to secure their long-term safety. Thus, Louise's future husband was being debated from when she was very young. Meanwhile, Louise grew up at various royal palaces and residences in and around Brussels. This included the royal palace in the centre of the city and a separate residence at Laeken on the outskirts of the city. Her father was a silent, distant figure, and she and her sisters were mainly raised by their mother. The children were also home-tutored, which was entirely normal for royalty in the 19th century. This included learning subjects like French, German, English, mathematics, history, classics and religion. One of the things Louise would have learned about was the culture divide in Belgium, which was already apparent in a country where there were both Protestants and Catholics, and also Dutch, German and French speakers in various regions. As mentioned, Louise's parents had a strained relationship, but Leopold was determined to have another son after the death of their only boy. And so, he attempted to revive marital life with the Queen, but hopes were dashed after a miscarriage in March 1871. Then, when Clementine was born in July 1872, the realization that there would be no male heir pushed the marriage to breaking point. Because only males could inherit the Belgian throne, Leopold spent much of his reign painfully aware that he had no direct successor. In the years that followed, Queen Marie Henriette withdrew increasingly from court. Eventually, she became known as the Queen of Spa for the amount of time she spent at the Belgian resort town rather than at Leopold's side. Up until the time of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, Leopold had believed that he would be pressured into marrying his daughter to Louis Napoleon, the son and heir of Napoleon III, the Emperor of the French. However, Napoleon was overthrown during the war, and a French Republic was re-established after the conflict. Negotiations then moved on to various other suitors. The one that was eventually decided upon was Ferdinand Philipp, Prince of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, one of the premier aristocratic lines of Germany. Philipp's family also had connections to the French and British royal families, and Philip had been born in Paris as the grandson of King Louis Philippe I of France, the ruler of the country between 1830 and 1848. In fact, Philip's royal connections linked him directly to Louise. Well, the two were closely related, being both paternal second cousins and maternal first cousins once removed. So, although Philip was not an heir to a major European throne, he still belonged to a powerful and prestigious dynasty. After lengthy negotiations and a postponed ceremony, the couple were finally married at the Royal Palace of Brussels on the 4th of February 1875, with Louise being just 17, while Philip was 31. Louise had high hopes for the marriage, as she had met Philip on several occasions prior to their wedding, and initially liked him. It became a disastrous union though. Philip was 14 years older than her, and the differences in their personalities soon became obvious to both of them. She would later reflect in her memoir that she had no idea what to expect on her wedding night, calling the experience so distressing that she fled the palace in her nightgown the next morning to hide in a greenhouse. In the weeks that followed, she described an unsettling routine in which Philip had her pour him wine while he read from erotic books before they went to bed. As well as this, the marriage separated Louise from her family, and after a brief tour of Europe's capitals, she and Philip eventually settled at the Habsburg court in Vienna. They took up residence in the Palais Coburg, and though it was grand, having been constructed in the 1840s, Louise later painted a far dimmer picture of the place. She claimed it was strangely furnished, dark, and that her large room terrified her. Worse still, the couple lived here with Philip's parents, and Louise found her mother-in-law to be a domineering woman and overly controlling in the household. Despite these problems, the couple welcomed 2 children here. Leopold Clement was born in 1878, and a daughter, Dorothea Maria Henriette, was born 3 years later in 1881. By now, her marriage and family life had become tense. Conflicts with her husband were frequent, and relations with her mother-in-law were reportedly difficult. She dealt with it by spending a lot of money, and soon she became an extravagant socialite who passed a lot of her time out and about in Vienna. Initially, motherhood had kept Louise largely homebound, but after suffering 2 miscarriages, her restlessness grew. Then, by the late 1880s, much of the day-to-day care of her children had passed to governesses, and she increasingly sought time away from the Palais Coburg. Louise's increasingly frequent absences soon had a far more scandalous explanation. In 1883, she plunged into a passionate affair with her husband's own military attaché. When he died in 1888, she swiftly transferred her affections to his successor, Baron Nicholas Dorey, an affair that blazed on until Dorey's marriage in October 1893 abruptly ended it. Whispers of Louise's behaviour spread like wildfire through the Habsburg court, and soon across Europe, causing such embarrassment that both her parents attempted, unsuccessfully, to halt the scandal from afar in Belgium. News of his daughter's infidelity displeased Leopold II enormously, and contributed to his growing animosity towards her. This was significant because owing to his personal rule of the Congo and Africa, Leopold had become immensely wealthy, and Louise was banking on receiving a massive inheritance. But as you will soon see, this wasn't to be. In 1895, Louise began a fiery affair with a young Croatian officer, Count Giza Matacic. From the moment they met, she was entranced. He was handsome, daring, and 9 years her junior, only 27 to her 37. When whispers of their liaison spread, the Habsburg court erupted in scandal. Then matters exploded on the 18th of February 1898, when Prince Philip, desperate to salvage his honour, challenged Giza to a duel, but he was swiftly defeated. In the aftermath, Louise fled to France, and when she returned, the consequences were brutal. Her children were taken, her marriage was effectively finished, but the worst was yet to come. Just weeks after the duel, Philip struck back in a far more devastating way. He had Louise declared insane and persuaded Emperor Franz Joseph I to confine her to an asylum. She was given a cruel choice: return to the Palais Coburg or live out the rest of her years in a mental institution. Louise chose the latter and was sent to an institution in Döbling near Vienna. Soon afterward, Giza himself was targeted. Accused of forging documents, he was arrested and thrown into prison. News of Louise's confinement quickly leaked, and the Austrian press erupted with sympathy for the fallen princess. Alarmed by the growing scandal, Philip had her quietly removed from the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1899 and transferred her to an institution in Saxony. There she vanished from public view. For years she saw no family at all, except for a single heartbreaking visit from her daughter, Dorothea, in February 1903. Meanwhile, Giza, imprisoned near Vienna, began an unlikely romance with Maria Stuger, a 23-year-old married woman who took a job in the prison solely to meet him. She gained his trust, became his mistress, and threw herself into winning his release, hiring lawyers, stirring the press, and even after being dismissed from the prison, continuing her crusade from outside. Her persistence eventually paid off, and Giza was pardoned in August 1902. Once free, Giza tried to rally support for Louise through articles and a memoir, but nothing changed until fate handed him an opening. In the summer of 1904, Louise was sent to Bad Elster in Saxony for a health cure, where surveillance was noticeably lax. Seizing the moment, Giza orchestrated her escape, and with Maria's help, they stole Louise away, and the three fled across the border into France. At last, after more than 6 years of confinement, Louise was free. The following year, Louise was officially declared sane, and in 1906, her long-delayed divorce was finally settled. Prince Philip granted her a respectable monthly pension, but Louise, long accustomed to extravagant luxury, was soon in debt. By now, Maria Stoger was out of the picture, and Louise and Giza would remain together for the rest of their lives, though they never married. Louise's father died on the 17th of December 1909 at 74 years of age. Her mother had passed away in 1902, while she was institutionalized. Although there had been rumors that he had married his long-term mistress, Caroline Lacroix, years earlier, who he had met in Paris in 1900 when she was 16 years old, in reality Leopold only married her 5 days before his death. He had also changed the provisions of his will, and this created the inheritance dispute that shaped the rest of Louise's life. A newspaper article from the time summarized the issues. It noted that Leopold's nephew Albert would succeed him quite smoothly as King Albert in line with Belgian law prohibiting female succession to the throne. The issue of his estate was much more complicated. Leopold had 2 daughters with Lacroix, in addition to Louise and her sisters. Although Leopold was enormously rich from the virtual fiefdom he had established over the Congo for a quarter of a century, he only left about $6 million worth of an estate to be divided between Louise, Stephanie, and Clementine. The rest of his wealth went to Lacroix. News of the inheritance dispensation scandalized Europe. Soon a legal battle commenced, as Louise and her biological sisters contested their father's will. Louise acted particularly quickly, and the newspapers reported that bailiffs had already arrived at the home of Lacroix to serve her with legal papers. In the end, though, the courts could only offer a small victory. In 1914, after years of bitter legal battles, Louise and her sisters were granted just over 5 million francs each from her father's estate. King Leopold II must have suspected that something like this would occur, as a lot of the money had been hidden in holding companies outside of Belgium, which had been created especially so that it was difficult for them to challenge the financial arrangements he had made. As a result, Louise and her sisters were effectively cut out of their father's inheritance. The payout they received might have seemed vast to ordinary people, and it was, but compared to Lacroix, the sisters were left out in the cold. Louise and Giza moved around for many years after the inheritance dispute. Strangely, they settled back in Vienna before the outbreak of the First World War, despite the many troubles they'd experienced there in years gone by. When the war broke out, they were asked to leave the country. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had allied with Germany in the war, and the first action of the Germans when the conflict began had been to invade neutral Belgium. Therefore, the Austrians did not want the daughter of the former king of the Belgians in Vienna. Despite being exiled from Austria-Hungary, the couple could not head to Louise's homeland either, as it was under German occupation. So, they went to live in Munich in southern Germany. While living in Munich, she learned that her son, Leopold Clement, had been involved in an incident on the 17th of October 1915, in which he had gotten into an argument with his mistress, who then shot him several times and broke a jar of sulfuric acid over his head before turning the gun on herself. He survived, but suffered grievous injuries, acid burn, the loss of one eye, shattered ribs and a ruptured spleen. After 6 months of agony, battling infections and complications from his wounds, he died in April 1916. To compound her plight, Giza was arrested the following August and sent to a prisoner of war camp in Budapest. Louise eventually returned to the Austro-Hungarian Empire to plead Giza's case, but by then she was increasingly poverty-stricken. With Belgium under occupation, the funds she once relied on were abruptly cut off, and her financial situation worsened. By early 1917, her debts had exploded to an astonishing 30 million marks. Declared insolvent, she could do nothing but watch as her remaining possessions were hauled off and sold at auction. With nothing to her name, she only managed to survive thanks to the occasional lifeline sent by her daughter Dorothea and her sister Stephanie. Relief for Louise and her lover came at the end of the First World War and the defeat of Germany and Austria-Hungary. He was eventually released, and they left for France as the old Habsburg Empire collapsed into multiple different countries and several years of internal wars. With no money to speak of, Louise set about writing her memoirs in France and published them as Around the Thrones That I Saw Fall in 1921. Although the book provided an engaging insight into the scandals of Europe's courts in the twilight of the imperial era, neither she nor Giza lived long enough to enjoy any major royalties. He died from uremia and heart problems in the autumn of 1923 while they were living in Paris. Louise relocated once again to Germany after this, but she did not live long either. She died in Wiesbaden in poverty on the 1st of March 1924 at 66 years of age. Her sole surviving child, Dorothea, married Ernst Günther, the Duke of Schleswig-Holstein. They did not have any biological children, although they did adopt several children. This means that Louise's biological line died out when Dorothea died decades later, in 1967. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Princess Louise of Belgium. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also leave them down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.